The controversy surrounding Red Bull and its F1 team boss Christian Horner has descended into crisis after extraordinary tension within the team was made public by Max Verstappen's father Jos. F1's season opener was dominated by Red Bull with a 1-2 for world champion Max Verstappen and teammate Sergio Perez, but the curtain raiser was overshadowed constantly through a remarkable week in Bahrain, and what was a dream start on track has been nothing less than a nightmare off it. Red Bull and Horner hoped a line could be drawn under the allegations about his conduct towards a female member of staff when the parent company dismissed a grievance against him on the eve of the new season. Instead, it has escalated to new heights, culminating in Jos Verstappen's shock warning that Red Bull Racing will explode if Horner remains in charge. On Wednesday, ahead of the Bahrain Grand Prix, Red Bull's parent company opted to keep Horner in his positions as team principal and CEO of Red Bull Racing. This followed the conclusion of the investigation into allegations about his conduct. That was an unsatisfactory outcome for some because of the refusal to disclose more detail, which meant having to take Red Bull on trust that the process really was fair and thorough and its decision was made for the right reasons. But the situation quickly moved well beyond calls for more transparency. About 24 hours after seemingly being cleared, towards the end of Horner's first day in the paddock, a dossier of 79 files implied to be evidence from the investigation was leaked. Screen grabs of alleged messages between Horner and the complainant were sent to more than 100 F1 personnel, including Championship CEO Stefano Domenicali, FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem, all of Horner's rival team bosses, members of the media including us, and Jos Verstappen, who was very much in a group of one. This was widely regarded as a deliberate attempt to destabilise and discredit Horner rather than be an act in the interest of forcing transparency. In Bahrain, it was speculated that Jos might be involved, but he has denied this is the case. The mid-event leak meant the situation didn't end with the conclusion of the investigation, and it gave way to a remarkable tension on Friday due to speculation another leak would come around qualifying, which didn't happen, but Horner did have separate meetings with Domenicali and Ben Sulayem that day to discuss the situation. On race day, Horner was joined by his wife Jerry in a deliberate display of support, interpreted by some as a statement of defiance that kept attention on Horner when he should have been laying low. After Red Bull dominated the Grand Prix, Horner reiterated in his media session he would not comment on the leak, which he described as anonymous speculative messages from an unknown source, or about the intentions of whoever was behind it. A question about whether the messages were genuine was interrupted and blocked by the team before Horner could answer, but with conviction, Horner insisted he believed he would continue to lead the team for the full season. Jos Verstappen's comments have to put that in doubt. Jos Verstappen has not only put fresh pressure on Horner by claiming Red Bull and its team are in an untenable situation, he has indirectly called for his head. It's also ensured the build-up to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix that follows immediately next Saturday will be dominated by the Saga 2, just as Horner and Red Bull would have desperately wanted this to stop. In interviews with UK newspaper The Daily Mail and Dutch publication The Telegraph given after his son Max cantered to victory in the race, Jos Verstappen has warned that Red Bull Racing will suffer if Horner remains as team principal. He said the situation is bad for the team and is driving people apart, with tension in the air, and has been quoted by the Mail as saying the team is in danger of being torn apart and will explode. Despite Horner saying after the race that the result demonstrates where the whole team's focus is, the reality is it faces an ongoing enormous destabiliser. Team members trackside and at the factory will not be able to ignore the situation nor the specifics, not what was leaked, regardless of whether it was all real, and not what Jos has said now. Their attention may not deviate when it counts, as shown by a flawless test and season opening race, and maybe Horner did retain full or overwhelming support from his team while the investigation was going on and when it was concluded, but his leadership has been compromised by the events of the last few days and maybe even fatally undermined. That is before factoring in what Red Bull's partners may or may not think. Remember, Ford was putting huge pressure on a resolution and demanding transparency, which it may not get, based on Red Bull's parent company not wanting to disclose the investigation's report to protect the privacy of those involved. Jos Verstappen is not a normal racing dad who sits idly by in the background. He intervenes more and wields more influence than you might think. The impact the Verstappen camp has on Red Bull Racing and on how Red Bull handles its F1 business is enormous, and Jos is a key part of that. They have a seat at the table, literally in the team's hospitality units at races, but also in terms of discussing how the team handles various matters, all with the intention of creating the best environment for Max. It means a significant figure related to the organisation and literally to its star driver is speaking out against Horner's leadership, effectively undermining it and indirectly calling for him to leave. His anti-Horner stance will also not help disabuse many in F1 of the notion that Red Bull's F1 operation has split into two factions. When Red Bull co-founder Dietrich Mateschitz died in late 2022, it was always possible that Red Bull Racing would be vulnerable to a fundamental shift in how the parent company wanted to proceed with its F1 program. Many believe that is happening now. There is the Horner-led Milton Keynes base on one side, with Horner also believed to have the support of the Uvidya family that owns 51% of Red Bull's parent company, and then there is the Red Bull parent company's Austrian contingent on the other side, led by Red Bull executive Oliver Mintzlaff, who the Verstappen camp is thought to have aligned with. Inevitably, as the remarkable Bahrain week played out, a topic of discussion was where exactly the pressure on Horner was coming from and whether it would ever relent. This followed a lot of speculation over how the investigation might be expediting an inevitable conflict. On one hand, all that happened was Horner became the subject of due process from a big company. The allegations at the heart of all this were clearly taken seriously enough to warrant a full and lengthy investigation instigated at the parent company's behest. That also fits a trend of Red Bull paying more attention to the F1 team and treating it like a proper part of the business with greater accountability. We obviously hope the investigation was taken extremely seriously, was handled correctly, and took place independently of any power struggle. But one way or another, it has become a part of a much bigger conflict. A civil war has started behind the scenes at Red Bull, and now the first shots have been fired in the open. Horner, Red Bull Racing and Red Bull the company cannot ignore this. There will likely be emergency talks to get ahead of the situation before the race in Jeddah. If not, the rising tension plays out in full view of everybody in F1, and Max will be confronted with this too. He's had to sidestep provocative comments from his father in the past, for instance when a blog post by Jos was posted on the official Verstappen website in response to Red Bull not favouring Max during the 2022 Monaco Grand Prix, a race won by Perez after he had secured a better grid position in part due to crashing in qualifying. But this is on another level entirely, especially as it came little more than 24 hours after Max had praised Horner in the post-qualifying press conference in Bahrain, even though then he stopped short of backing Horner to stay in the position. Max offered what was seen by many as qualified support when asked if he still had full faith in Horner's leadership. He called him an incredible team boss in terms of how he operates within the team, and said you can't even question the performance side. Max said that's his focus and Horner's too, and said what's going on is not our business, referring to himself and Red Bull's trackside team. But Jos has now made it his son's business by calling the team boss's position into question, which has also detracted from that performance focus. Whatever Red Bull's response, or Horner's, it is beginning to look impossible that he will be able to ride out the scrutiny and the speculation without further threats to his leadership. Attacks, or at least questions, will keep on coming. Partners are demanding answers, F1 and the FIA are concerned about the damage this is doing to the championship, and rival teams are circling with repeated calls for more transparency. And on top of that, Horner now seems to be coming under friendly fire. It is a live and volatile situation and may have even moved on by the time you're watching this video. Will Horner respond? What kind of action could Red Bull take? Could Jos Verstappen go even further, and if so, how? Red Bull and Horner must have hoped, even if it was a bit naive, that the controversy would end with the conclusion of the investigation. Instead, it's potentially coming to a head in the most destructive way possible.